Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about writing and solving linear word problems. So this can be a difficult section for students. So this is one video lesson. All the video lessons you want to take excellent notes, but this one here you want to take excellent notes. If you need to go back and rewatch something, please do so. It may be essential for your understanding. So with any word problems, or any word problem, the first thing you want to do is read the problem carefully, okay? And it's really beneficial to have it on paper or take a screenshot, and then you could do highlight keywords that mean specific operations like I'm doing right now, and make sure you understand what the problem is asking. And a lot of times what the problem is asking is in the last sentence, because you have to read through all the words of the problem and determine what your goal is and what you're trying to find. So make sure you read the problem carefully. Second thing you want to do is write down, label, and represent your unknowns algebraically. A lot of times, and when I say a lot of times, I mean sometimes when students are solving these problems, they'll say, well, I don't know where to start. And I'll direct them to these steps. Represent your unknowns algebraically. So for right now, since we're doing linear equations, you want to use the same variable, but you'll represent the different situations using that variable, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. So step 3 is use your unknowns to write your equation. Okay, so this is the first 3 steps are probably the hardest part. In many cases, you'll be adding or subtracting your unknowns and setting that equal to the total, okay? So if you're adding, you'll say like sum or all together. If you're subtracting, it might say something like difference, okay? Step 4 is probably the easiest one, solve the equation, all right? So once you do all the difficult work, solving the equation is usually the easiest part. But once you get your answer, sometimes you're not done. Read the problem carefully, right? Especially that last sentence. And when you find an unknown, sometimes you have to plug that back in to find either both unknowns or a different aspect of the problem. So make sure once you get your final answer, you read the problem and see what you're actually trying to find. Sometimes you have to do one more step with the answer you get, okay? And then make sure you label your final answer. So what I mean by that is, if the problem is asking for how many feet, then you would say 3 feet. So these steps are really, really important. Definitely copy them down in your notes. And also, one more thing before we start, you're going to be using at times your keywords, okay? Especially like sum, difference. You might use product. Is means equal. So don't be afraid to revisit this keywords chart at any time, okay? So, take a screenshot, whatever you got to do. This is in Google Classroom for your reference as well. But we'll be using these keywords, so you need to know at times what certain words mean specific operations to help you write the equation correctly. Okay, so we'll start off easy. Now, again, they get harder and harder as we go. So the first one you might seem not too bad, and you're like, oh, okay, this is pretty easy. I don't need to follow all these steps. And then you'll see they get harder and harder. So example 1, 3 times the sum of a number and 5 is 27. What is the number? So it looks like we're only finding one number. So I'm going to let that be x, so it's our unknown. And it says 3 times the sum, so I'm going to label above it. Times means multiplication, 3. Now the sum means we're adding 2 things. And the 2 things we're adding actually come after the phrase. So we're adding a number, this is the number over here, a number and 5. The word and joins the 2 things we're adding. And then is means equals, okay? But remember, when you have the phrase times the sum, whatever you're multiplying by has to go in parentheses. So that's actually the equation that you'll solve, okay? So times the sum, when you're multiplying something to a sum, that sum has to go in parentheses. So most of you would probably distribute first here. 3x plus 15 equals 27. Subtract 15 and divide by 3. And I might skip some of the easier parts because I want to focus on the major aspects of word problems. So you divide by 3 there. X is 4. Again, this was an intro level problem. We only had to find one number here, and we found x. So x is 4. Okay, and if you're in doubt, you can plug 4 back in there. 4 plus 5 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. Okay? So again, you see your keywords were really important there. And actually, if I go back, phrases that mean a quantity times the sum, right? It says with an operational word before, usually that word is times. So times the sum tells you need parentheses. Okay, so here's where we get to the good stuff. Example 2. John and Lewis play in the same basketball team. Now, that is important to give us context, but not really valuable to solving the problem. Combined, they scored 34 points. That's important. Combined means if we take their totals and add them together, we get 34. So blank plus blank equals 34. Maybe I'll let the first blank be Lewis, right? Because it said John and Lewis. And the second blank be John. Okay, now we have to represent their amounts algebraically because watch what it says in the next sentence. Lewis scored 8 points less than the number of points John scored. Find the number of points each person scored. So here's where it gets a little tricky. Okay? So Lewis scored 8 points less than the number of points John scored. Right now, we don't know how many either person scored. But we do know John scored 8 points less. Lewis. I apologize, that's really important. Lewis scored 8 points less than John. So since we don't know anything about John's amount, I'm going to let John be X. So John's amount I don't know anything about. That's critical. So if I don't know anything about something, let it be your variable. Now it says Lewis scored 8 points less than the number of points John scored. Well, we don't know John, but we have John's points represented by X. If John scored 8 points less, or I keep saying that, if Lewis scored 8 points less than the number of points John scored, that means that we're going to subtract 8 from John's points. So right now John's points are X, so Lewis is going to be X minus 8. Okay? So we're going to have two X's in the equation. Now some people really have a hard time conceptualizing that. But let me explain it like this. If John had, and I'm just putting a random number out there, if John had 15 points, well, Lewis scored 8 points less than that. So 15 minus 8 would be 7, right? So that's why this algebra works over here. Because again, if John scored 15, right, we plug 15 right here. And if you plug 15 right here, you get 7. So, but we don't know John's amount. I just gave you a random number and said John's amount was 15, right? So whenever you don't know something, let it be your variable. In this case, we don't know John's amount, so that was X. Lewis's was described based on John's amount. So Lewis's is going to involve John's amount, but it's going to be 8 less than that, which is X minus 8. So now we have our equation. So it's X minus 8 plus X equals 34. Remember, the X minus 8 is Lewis, the X is John. Now we can solve it, okay? And here's the easy part. Combine like terms, X plus X is 2X. So we add 8 and divide by 2, right? X is 21. But we're not done, okay? So X is 21. Well, go back and look how we labeled them. John was X. So that means John scored 21, okay? And to find Lewis's, I could put 21 right here. 21 minus 8 would be 13. Or I could just subtract 21 minus 34 to get that 13 as well. So John scored 21 points, and then Lewis scored 13 points. And if you add those up, you get 34. Okay? And a lot of times, and it's a little bit jumbled in that work that I just have there, it may be more beneficial to label them off to the side. So remember we had John, and then we had Lewis, right? So if you remember, we didn't know anything about John's amount. That was X. Lewis's amount was X minus 8 because Lewis scored 8 points less than John. So for our equation, we add them together, right? X minus 8, Lewis's amount, plus X equals 34, right? And then when you solve your equation, remember we got X equals 21, right? Now you just take them and just plug them right back in here. So 21 points. And we have to label that for our final answer. And then plug 21 right here. 21 minus 8 is 13. 13 points. And then when you add them together, you get 34. So we did answer the question, because if you remember the question it asked, if I go back here, how many points did each one score? Okay? I like to call that problem a comparison problem. And then we're also going to do some consecutive integer problems today. Okay? Now, there's a couple different ways to do these problems. Sometimes with these linear equation word problems, you could use what's called guess and check. Guess and check is where you play around with numbers till you figure out the answer, and that's totally fine. And there are some strategies for that. I'm going to show you using algebra today. So example 3. The sum of 3 consecutive integers is 348. Find the integers. So consecutive means they're in order. So for example, 3, 4, 5 would be consecutive integers. Or 10, 11, 12. Or 153, 154, 155. Those would be consecutive integers. So consecutive integers mean they're in order. Well, right now I don't know what the 3 integers are. So let the first one be x. Okay? But if you think about consecutive integers, and again, this is not the exact problem here, but if you look at consecutive integers, and I'm just writing a couple sets down. If you look at consecutive integers, the next one is 1 bigger than the previous, right? So we have 31, that was 1 bigger than 30. So if I don't know what the integers are, I let my first one be x. Then my second integer is going to be 1 bigger than x. So it's going to be x plus 1. Then our third integer, it's going to be 2 bigger, right? If you look, 10 and 12, right, compared to the first one. So that'd be x plus 2. So here are the 3 integers algebraically, okay? We have x, since they're consecutive, and the next one's 1 bigger than the previous. The second one is x plus 1, and the third one is x plus 2. So I represented all our unknowns algebraically, right? So now what we do is we take those integers, we add them up, because it's sum, and set it equal to 343. So x plus 1, second integer, plus x plus 2, the third integer, equals 348. And now the easy part, we solve, right? So we have 3 x's, 3x, other constants, plus 3, right, the 1 and the 2, equals 348. And again, you're just solving, so subtract 3, 3x equals 345, divide by 3, x equals 115, right? Now remember, we're not done. It says find the integers. So think about how you label them. This is why labeling is helpful. So the first one's 115, then the next one's 1 bigger, 116, and the third one would be 117. If you add those 3 integers up, I guarantee you get 348. Okay? Now instead of doing example 4, I'm going to show you a different way to do example 3. And I would invite you, pause the video, take 30 seconds, or please longer. See if you can come up with a non-algebraic way to solve this. All right, so pause the video and see if you can do that. All right, so and a lot of students like this method better, and I totally understand that because it's a little bit less work. But as long as your integers are consecutive, here's a little shortcut. If they're consecutive, that means they're close together, right? So what I can do is, as long as the integers are consecutive, I can take whatever the sum is equal to and divide it by how many consecutive integers I have. And what that's going to do, it's going to give me a general area of where to guess, okay? So if I divide 348 by 3, I get 116. So that's a general area where to guess, right? I'm still doing example 3, just so you're not confused. We're not doing example 4 today, okay? But now I can play around with numbers around 116, and so I might try like 116, 117, 118, or 115, 116, 117. And it turns out that if you add those 3 numbers up, that gives you 348. So that's a little bit of a shortcut way, as long as the integers are consecutive. So for example, if I was talking about 4 consecutive integers, I could take the sum and divide it by 4. And that would give me a general area of where to guess numbers. It's not necessarily going to be the exact number in the middle. It could be if you have an odd number. But that's another way that the students like. So thank you very much for your attention. Tomorrow we'll continue with some of the harder examples, because this is actually, we're just breaking the surface. So again, thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. Have a fantastic day, everybody.